My name is Isaiah Castilleja, and this is my presentation on acceleration biomechanics. Acceleration in physics is the rate at which the velocity of a body changes with time. So in sports performance, what we look for as coaches in acceleration is when an athlete starts from a stationary position and begins to rapidly create locomotion in a straight line. So what I performed was the qualitative biomechanical analysis to improve technique. So the goal of my study was to perform a qualitative analysis of sprint and acceleration. So specifically the biomechanics of the first 3 or 4 steps of a sprint and how it could relate to the performance of an athlete. So my goal was to provide as much quantitative comparisons from the original test to the post-test to determine whether or not biomechanical correction increased sports performance. My goal was to find out if the research out there proved that there was indeed a more efficient way to accelerate in a sports competition. So why is acceleration important? This is Peyton Manning, great quarterback. I wouldn't say exactly the ideal picture of acceleration mechanics, but he's showing some decent mechanics here. And it's also important in any other sporting event when you outmaneuver opponents. And it also creates an advantage for athletes as far as possibility of preventing injury for more efficient mechanics. Evade competitors and even increase the quickness. But there is definitely a viable reason to include acceleration training in strength conditioning, sports performance, however you look at it. It is important for the athlete to be able to maneuver and get to where they want to quickly in a very efficient manner. So here's what we researched is what I researched is the contributing factors to acceleration. So the biomechanical advantages, joint kinematics, force application, and I'll go into this a little later, and the physiological aspects of acceleration. So things like stretch shortening cycle and the actual force production. So first thing I'll go into is joint kinematics. Calvin Johnson, very fast player. One thing I wanted to establish here is what I found was proper acceleration not only is great for sprinting and like the track and field aspect of it, but it also applies and correlates into any sport. In this case, it's football. You can see he's in the first phases of mechanics. Like I said, I'll explain that in a second. A study by Ansari, Paul, and Sharma found as far as joint kinematics, there are 3 major factors of joint angles and how they contribute to acceleration and increased sports performance. The first one you can see here is from the Calvin Johnson picture, a smaller knee angle. So the smaller the knee angle, and you can see this is the left leg, but it's the forward leg where the hip and knee and ankle are all flexed. It increases, or it actually shortens the lever for greater speed. So by shortening the lever of the front and up leg, is able to produce, or an athlete would be able to produce greater force production with less amount of work needed to do it by just decreasing the moment arm of the forward leg. And continuing the Ansari, Paul, and Sharma study, increased hip flexion creates larger horizontal ground reaction forces. So you can see right here, it's still the Calvin Johnson picture, 39.4 degrees. Allows for greater force production. I'm actually going to go into the physiological aspect and how the increased hip flexion creates a larger horizontal ground reaction force. And the final part you'll be able to see right here. Now it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but ankle dorsiflexion increases the distance covered per stride. So if an athlete were to plantar flex throughout this motion, his foot would catch sooner in distance than an ankle that is dorsiflexed, and simply by making contact sooner and shortening up his stride length, the athlete will not be able to cover greater distances as compared to a foot that's dorsiflexed. So it may sound trivial, however, in sports performance, when every little second, every little inch counts, it's important to make sure the athlete's 100% efficient. Next little thing we'll go into is the physiology of acceleration mechanics. So Harrison, Keene, and Coughlin found that the optimal joint kinematics created better stretch shortening cycles. So as we went in the first with the Ansari article, you saw the joint angles and how they helped in greater movement. But as you can see here, the hip, the knee, and the ankle are all flexed. This creates a stretch on the posterior muscles, so the gluteus muscles, hamstring muscle groups, and the gastroc and soleus are all being stretched. And as most of us all know, with the stretch shortening cycle, the greater the stretch, immediately followed with the down force, created a greater contraction force in the muscles. So greater stretch here when everything is flexed appropriately, greater force production when it actually comes time to contract. So that's an important aspect. Another thing is if we can get the athlete to produce more force by simply changing joint angles passively, or I guess not passively, but by creating more efficient joint angles without the athlete having to strain too much and still increase force production, is a very, very valuable tool that a sports performance coach could add to their arsenal. And then the most important, or not the most important thing, but very important thing is the application of the force. So it wouldn't really matter if we can get the joint kinematics down and create a greater contraction force if we can't apply the force in the correct direction. So as you'll see here, there's a slight forward lean. On the down leg, he's driving the foot down and more posteriorly to his body. And then with the equal and reactive force coming back up, it's going to propel him horizontally. You'll see some poor sprint mechanics that a person who is more vertical with their stride will apply the force more directly beneath him, and therefore the reaction force will push the athlete more vertically, which has its purposes, but when it comes to acceleration, you want to be propelled forward. So by being able to propel or to generate and create the ground reaction forces slightly posteriorly, it allows the reactive force to be propelled the athlete forward or horizontally. So I was able to drag my unfortunate fiance into this little test that I had, but she was a good sport about it. What I wanted to analyze originally was her acceleration mechanics. I had her sprint 20 yards, so I was there with the camera for the first about 3 or 4 strides, and then we had a friend down 20 yards down to test her to see how long it took, and we compare and contrast whether or not the more efficient angles and mechanics would, if it would indeed help her out as far as performance. So the original test, we did a 20-yard sprint. She did perform the 20-yard sprint in 2.5 seconds, and the focus was, of course, on the first steps. And we will see right here her video of her running. Poor girl, she had had very little to no instruction at all. I just wanted to see what she would do instinctively, and then about an hour later, and I'll show you the exercises we did to help out. Hour later, we with the correct exercises and technique, somewhat, actually she did really well with the technique cleaned up significantly. She was able to actually almost wipe out 0.5 of a second off her score. However, in any athlete, Olympic level or high school or even elementary level, if an athlete's able to decrease time sprinting even by 1/10 of a second, it can make the big difference in any kind of athletic competition. So here's what her sprint looked like with the correct form being correct form. I helped out her starting stance a little bit, and then I'll actually show you what it. On the left, you'll see her original start position, and this was the best angle that I could get. So as you see here, you see a lot of breaks in the kinetic chain. So if she's pushing through this back left foot, it has to travel up the ankle. It would lose a little energy here. The hip's not fully extended, so she's not producing as much force as she can, and her torso slightly loose, so she's not tightened up. So those are all the force production produced down here is leaking all the way up the top. Lack of adequate knee flexion, as we saw before, or in our original study by Ansari. The greater the knee flexion, the greater the stretch on the glutes and the hamstrings to be able to produce force. And she also did get pretty vertical, so you can see she's a lot higher in her takeoff. With this foot going to be driving down, it's going to create a more vertical pattern of force application. One good thing is, I like in the front foot, she had good ankle dorsiflexion, so she was able to still get the stretch on the gastroc and soleus. On the right is actually the corrected version from the original analysis, is how he improved on her biomechanics and she looks phenomenal. I was really proud of her. She I mean, for putting up with me, trying to tell her what to do for an hour, I think it was great. Right here, she has perfectly straight line from hip to knee to ankle. As you can see, extension at the hip allows for full contraction of the glutes and hamstrings. Extension at the knee and extension at the ankle ensures that the entire posterior chain muscles that generate the force are contracting fully. So she fixed the ankle dorsiflexion right here, so she was able to even the muscles of the gastroc and soleus can still provide a phenomenal force production. She corrected the kinetic chain. As you can see, there's a straight line from ankle to shoulder. So any force being applied here is going to be able to transfer through the body and propel her forward without any real leaks in her kinetic chain. You can see her knee flexion increased significantly. So the angle decreased, but the knee flexion increased. And it's huge. It's huge. So this increase in knee flexion allowed for a greater stretch on the glutes, hamstrings, and she did keep the dorsiflexion, which is great. So now she's assuring on this leg strike when she lands that the glutes, the hamstrings, and the gastroc and soleus are all contracting as powerfully as they can, or at least as efficiently as she can, by creating a greater stretch shortening reflex. And then the final thing, she had great application of force. So she's applying the force slightly posteriorly to her, and with the slight forward lean, she's able to increase her horizontal movement, which is important. So in this one step, she was able to propel herself at a greater rate, or at least a faster rate. And in one stride, she's already further than she would have been in 2 strides in the previous one. So this is an example of how a sports performance coach, strength and conditioning coach, fitness professional can analyze an athlete or a client's biomechanics, and with simple corrections in biomechanics could significantly increase, or at least increase the efficiency of the sports performance of the athlete or client to the betterment of everybody. So with this conclusion, I'd like to say that it was really great to know that if a sports performance coach or fitness professional is willing to look into actually being able to analyze an athlete or a client and being able to help correct them, you significantly aid the athlete or client in achieving goals. Mr. Michael Johnson here, who tore things up in the Atlanta games, and as you can see, he's got really good sprint mechanics on the right, and the result was gold shoes and 2 gold medals. I'm not saying by getting correct sprint mechanics you're going to be anywhere close to this guy, but if we can help as a professional and to help out our profession in knowing biomechanics, I feel it's a very, very applicable benefit to everybody. There's my references.